The book of the prophet Joel. A very, very difficult book indeed. And we've reached chapter 3. In our last study, we covered more or less, I wouldn't say that we understood it, at least I didn't altogether. We covered chapter 3, verses 1 to 8. And in verses 1 to 3 of chapter 3, and again following on into the next section, we emphasize a great deal, or through Joel's words, God's care for his people and the value that God sets upon his people. Throughout these 8 verses, there's a lot of emphasis on God saying, my people, my work. And we all enjoyed immensely looking up the references in the prophecy of Zechariah, where God said, you know, you lot, you are the apple of my eye. And I think we all felt we could take any amount of that kind of information from the Bible. Basically, in verses 4 to 8, the theme was how God identifies with his people. And even when he is using the pagan nations round about to discipline his own people, God still says, but they are my people. And the essence of it really is that God says, now, because you are my people, I have the right to chastise you. But nobody else is entitled to lift up their hand against you unless I give them strict instructions and set limits on what they're allowed to do. And I find that immensely comforting. Whom the Lord loves, he chastens. And when he chastens us and rebukes us, and sometimes turns us upside down and inside out and shakes us till we rattle, it is the work of the God who's saying at the very same time, you know, you are the apple of my eye, and my heart loves you with a love that you'll never really understand. And I think maybe through all the ages of eternity in heaven, we'll still be discovering the sheer extent of the love with which God has loved us. Isn't it in the epistle of John where John urges us to believe the love that God has for us? Sometimes when we're being good and we know we're being good, we find it reasonably easy to believe that God loves us. But when we're being bad, when we're being difficult, when we're being perverse, we need to remember then the love that God has for us. And God is saying through Joel, I have the right to chastise my people, but you evil nations, you do not have that right. Now for us, it is sometimes difficult. You see, God is speaking his judgment, his words of judgment with regard to the nations. And we sometimes find it difficult to see God's judgment in the world of nations. But we must believe that that is the case. We sang about it in our opening praise. You have the same kind of reference, if I remember rightly, in Psalm number 9, which we sometimes sing in the metrical version to the tune Stroudwater, I think. The Lord sits enthroned forever. He has established his throne for judgment. He judges the world with righteousness. Notice, not he will judge, although that is also true. He presently. This is what God is doing now. He judges the world with righteousness. He judges the peoples with equity. The Lord is a stronghold for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. And those who know thy name put their trust in thee, for thou, O Lord, hast not forsaken those who seek thee. So you see, on the one hand, we have God saying, my people, who are in my care. And I am the only one who is allowed to touch them or to allow them to be touched. On the other hand, there is God judging the nations. We may not discern very clearly God's righteous judgments in the nations, but we mustn't jump to conclusions, but we must watch what is going on. This is why it is so important for Christians to read their daily newspapers and to listen to news bulletins, so that we have some idea of what is going on in the world. Now, there's a lot of it we don't know. I don't know. I can't understand what's going on in Rwanda. And when I hear how many millions, what did it say in the news tonight? 500,000 of refugees. It's only a small country. And was it just in the course of the week, earlier on in the week, where they talked in terms of 10,000 in one place being killed? I don't understand. I don't understand, and I cannot foresee what may yet develop in South Africa once the elections are over. There are so many strands, not least tribal strands and cultural strands. So many elements in the world situation that are instinctively against each other. You know, if we didn't believe that God is on the throne, as we said in the prayer, and that power belongs to Him, and that the issues are in His hand, I think we would panic. We may not see, we may not understand, but we must watch what is going on and seek to discern as we are able God's dealings, not just with the nations, but with His church. There's been a lot in the prophecy of Joel, you see, about God dealing with His own people. And I believe that in many different ways, not just in our own denomination, but in many, many different ways, and in all the different agencies of the Christian church, I believe that God is dealing with His church. There is very little evidence in many, many places, certainly in our own land, very little evidence of the church turning the world upside down. God is dealing with His church, His people. God is dealing with the nations. And what God does, and what God allows, and when God acts and how God acts, is for God to decide. We could quote in that context, we'll read it tomorrow night if I remember rightly, "Humble yourself therefore under the mighty hand of God, so that in due season He may exalt you." And one of the verses that came very much to my mind and heart as I prepared for this Bible study was that verse. We spent a lot of time in Ephesians on Sunday evenings, Ephesians chapter 1 at verse 10, where it speaks about God's plan for the fullness of the time. God doesn't work in sections. He has a plan for the full. You may say, well, what does that mean? I think He has a plan for the full course of history, from the beginning of history to the end of history. He is clear, absolutely clear, as to His own purpose. And when we pray, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," we are not expressing a pious hope. We're not even expressing an earnest prayer. We're really stating a fact. His will shall be done on earth as it is in heaven. And with that kind of introduction, we come to the rest of the chapter, which I confess I do not really understand. So we better read it through. Proclaim among the nations, prepare war. Stir up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords. Oh, you say, that's not what Isaiah says. That's not what Micah says. They say it the other way around. Beat your swords into plowshares. Now, we mustn't assume that Joel's got it wrong. Beat your plowshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am a warrior. Hasten and come, all you nations round about. Gather yourselves there. And then bring down thy warriors, O Lord. Let the nations bestir themselves and come to the valley of Jehoshaphat. See, this is really a challenge from God. All you pagan nations, all you who've spoken against me and against my people and acted against me and acted against my people. Right, you've wanted a fight. Right, you'll have a fight. Gather the nations and come into the valley of Jehoshaphat. For there I will sit to judge all the nations round about. Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Go in, tread, for the winepress is full, the vats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars withdraw their shining, and the Lord roars from Zion, and utters his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shake. But the Lord is a refuge to his people, a stronghold to the people of Israel. So you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who dwell in Zion, my holy mountain, and Jerusalem, my place, shall be holy, and strangers shall never again pass through it. And in that day the mountains shall drip sweet wine, and the hills shall flow with milk, and all the stream beds of Judah shall flow with water, and a fountain shall come forth from the house of the Lord, and water the valley of Shittim. Egypt shall become a desolation, and Edom a desolate wilderness, for that is because of the violence done to the people of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. But Judah shall be inhabited forever, and Jerusalem to all generations. I will avenge their blood, and I will not clear the guilty. For the Lord dwells in Zion, that is, the Lord dwells among his people. Now you can understand how honestly I said I do not understand a passage like that. As far as I understand it, in verses 9 to 12, the nations are summoned to a trial of strength. Nations that have been proud in their wickedness. And God says, right, let's see it. And the nations are summoned to a trial of strength. And it's important to notice in these verses 9 to 12 that it is God who takes the initiative, not evil. It often seems as if evil's doing this, and evil's, and I've heard Christian people, evil's in the driving seat. It's nothing of the sort. It never has been. The driving seat belongs to God. That's a comfort. It is God who takes the initiative. Granted, he has allowed evil nations, and he has used evil nations in the outworking of history. It's always caused me a bit of amazement to think of how, just in the post-apostolic times, the whole of North Africa was a great citadel of spiritual truth. Now, for generations, it's been a stronghold of Islam. Now, why? We should have learned by now from our studies in Scripture, from Paul's missionary journeys, that Asia Minor was a great citadel of mighty spiritual churches, and now a stronghold of Islam. But remember, in the letters to the churches in the book of Revelation, God was saying to some of the now, you get your act together, or I will remove your candlestick out of its place. Well, they didn't get their act together. They didn't repent of their casualness and their superficiality and their spiritual pride. They didn't take to heart the fact that God has said, you have left the love that you had at the first. And their candlesticks were removed, and a place that had the glorious light of the gospel became covered with the darkness of unbelief. One of the things that's causing a lot of concern in Scotland at the moment is just the sheer number of churches that are being closed. And greater areas, mostly in the country at the moment, greater and greater areas of Scotland are really without any real biblical ministry. I can remember a way back, I was told about it in my mother's young days, the whole of the interior area, the Donside area of Aberdeenshire was a tremendous centre of gospel truth. My mother, who was worked as a servant, told me of how in Craig Castle, in the wilds of Aberdeenshire, in the stone-flagged kitchen of the castle, there were gospel meetings every Sunday evening. The county classes were all evangelical believers. But ask any minister or any person who has done pulpit supply in the wilds of Aberdeenshire, you'll hardly find a harder area in the whole of Scotland, except perhaps down in the borders, which used to know the Covenanters. See what I mean when I say we've got to read our papers, we've got to consider. We should even read a bit of church history, so that we might be awakened and warned. So in these verses 9 to 12, the nations are summoned to a trial of strength, and the day of reckoning has come. And there's some very, very vivid pictures, let the nations bestir themselves and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Oh, maybe you're saying, is that linked up with the Battle of Armageddon? I haven't a clue. And I'm not terribly sure what is meant by the Battle of Armageddon. Some idea. But it speaks of a day of reckoning. And in the book of Revelation, chapters 14, 16 and 19, there are some very vivid pictures of the gathering together of various strands of history and various nations for a great day of reckoning. And I think it's in that context that we read verse 10, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. God is challenging evil in the form of evil nations to a showdown. And right through into verse 11, hasten and come all you nations round about, gather yourselves there. Then there's this phrase, this sentence, bring down thy warriors, O Lord. What does that mean? What does it mean when there's a reference to God's warriors? Well, doesn't the Bible often speak about God as the Lord of hosts? What kind of hosts? I see I've got a reference marked here. I want to quote it accurately. It's in Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26 and verse 53. Remember in Garden of Gethsemane, and Peter gets out his sword. He's a great boy, was Peter. He's always showing how brave he was. He's waving his sword. And Jesus said, put it away. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? Now, Peter and the disciples could understand 12 legions of Roman soldiers, because they would often see that. But Jesus, I could snap my fingers and get 12 legions of angels. Is that what the reference is? Bring down thy warriors, O Lord. Where is it in the Old Testament where it says, the stars in their courses fought against Sisera? I'm not totally sure what it means, but I'm all in favour of it. The hosts of God. We sing a hymn, don't we? The hosts of God encamp around the dwellings of the just. You ever think of a ring of angels round about you? Oh, I believe in angels. Never seen any. Bring down thy warriors, O Lord. There may be some reference here. I don't want to go into all this. There may be some reference here to the kind of thing that you read in some of the chapters, the later chapters of the book of Daniel, where in answer to prayer God was going to come, but the prince of Persia delayed. There was a battle behind the scenes. And maybe what we've got to remind ourselves of with regard to world history is something that we've been learning in our studies in Ephesians chapter 6. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in the heavenly places. Then you see, there's not only evil forces in the heavenly places, there's God's warriors, all standing ready. A bit like, yes, most of you are too young to remember this, a bit like the great massing of the armies on the south coast of England prior to D-Day, and then the invasion of Europe. And Europe wasn't really aware of the power that was ready. Bring down thy warriors, O Lord. Let the nations bestir themselves and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit to judge all the nations round about. And Jesus speaks in Matthew chapter 25 about the judgment of the nations. And I think, well, all that I can think about in this is in relation to all the kingdoms of the world, all the empires, all the movements, all the philosophies that have militated against God and against Christ and against the gospel and against God's ransomed church are called to their day of judgment. In verses 13 to 17, the picture is more not so much of a battle, but it's much more of a harvest. Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Go and tread the winepress, because all the harvest of the grapes has been reaped, been gathered in. And remember, in the parable of the tares and the wheat in Matthew chapter 13 verse 39, Jesus said, let both grow together till the harvest. Then God will send his angels, and they'll put in the sickle and reap the harvest. And you see, by the time of the harvest, by the time of the vintage or the gathering in of the grapes, the crops are fully grown, and they are seen for what they are. The corn is seen to be corn. The weeds are seen to be weeds. And in due time, those who are of God through Jesus Christ will be seen to be of God. And those who are not of God will be seen beyond any doubt to be not of God and to have no part in God. Think of the words of Jesus, depart from me, I never knew you. You are not mine. You never have been mine. And oh, so sorry, you never will be mine. Oh, remember earlier on in Joel, we learned of how right up to the very last minute, God is eager to welcome in those who are penitent. And the harvest here in verses 13 to 17 is the final harvest, the final judgment. And I suppose we all forget, or tend to forget, that final judgment will come. I know there's been times in our own land when there has been far, far too much preaching about judgment, as if the whole gospel was judgment. Without mentioning names, someone brought up in the Highlands and church going in the Highlands said to me on one occasion, "You know, Mr. Flip, it was only when I began to come to Sandyford that I learned that God loved me." I think that's a terrible tragedy. People brought up, their only concept of the gospel is the thundering of judgment and the fear of hell. Now, there is judgment. There is a hell to be feared. But that is not the whole gospel. And yet we must not forget that there is the judgment. Verse 14, multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. As I said the other Saturday, that's a great gospel text. But this verse doesn't really apply to people's decision. This applies to God's decision that the day of judgment has come. And God's decision, as I said just a moment ago, to say to many, "Depart from me, you that work iniquity." It goes over against that. "Well done, thou good and faithful servants." Oh, you've maybe struggled, but you've kept on struggling. And God said, "Yes," says God, "I know fine why you kept on struggling. It's because you loved me and you knew that I loved you. Yes, it's been an uphill struggle, but oh, you're mine, you're mine, you're mine. Enter thou into the joy of your Lord." Verses 16 and 17. The Lord rose from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem. God speaks and God acts in a way that is quite unmistakable. Verse 17, "So you shall know that I am..." but he's speaking now to his people. "You shall know that I am the Lord your God." But God doesn't roar to his people. That's not the voice of redeeming love. So you see how there's the two strands all the way through. The Lord rose from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shake. There is no doubt at all that it is God who is speaking. It's sort of paralleled by that verse in Revelation chapter 1, is it verse 7, which speaks about the Lord coming in his glory, and every eye will see him, and those who pierced him will mourn. They'll see this Jesus, and in the moment of seeing him at his coming, their hearts will say, "And that's the Jesus that I've resisted and refused all along the line." God speaks and acts. But God, the end of verse 16, the Lord is a refuge to his people, a stronghold to the people of Israel. They have nothing to fear. God's people have nothing to fear. "So you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who dwell in Zion, my holy mountain, and Jerusalem shall be holy, and strangers shall never again pass through it." Well, strangers have passed through Jerusalem a lot since then, and the Roman armies destroyed it in AD 70. So I don't quite know how we've to understand this verse. Jerusalem, so often in the prophet, symbolizes all that belongs to God. And God seems to be saying here, what is mine and belongs to me is safe forever. And as so often in the prophets, immediately following upon the solemnity of judgment there is the wonder of God's blessing. In that day the mountains shall drip sweet wine, the hills shall flow with milk, all the stream beds of Judah shall flow with water, and a fountain shall come forth from the house of the Lord. I don't think we need to imagine a stream coming from the actual temple in Jerusalem. I think that's taking it too literally. And this goes on right down to verse 21. Yes, there's judgment mingled with it, but the end of the chapter is, the Lord dwells in Zion. But when you read in verse 18 about the mountains dripping sweet wine, the hills flowing with milk, the stream beds of Judah flowing with water. And you see, when the rivers of Judah are filled with water, the whole land is fertile. Well, you say, Mr. Liff, what are we to take out of all this? Well, I'm not terribly sure. But what I took out of it when I read these last verses, I meant to look up the reference. It's somewhere in Corinthians. Quoting from the old authorized version, eye has not seen, nor ear heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man the things that God has prepared for them that love him. When I spoke to the students in Aberdeen last night about heaven, and they're saying, I'm all for it. I really am. Oh, these verses speak about streams in the desert. Oh, what a word when sometimes we feel that our Christian lives are all a bit barren. Streams in the desert. Fountains of living water. And all that we mean, that's in verse 19, all that we mean by evil, dealt with fully and finally. And I suppose when I get down to the end of the chapter, the Lord dwells in Zion. The Lord dwells among his people. Oh, there's so much. Our time is really gone, but we'll take time because we're finishing Joel tonight. Turn over to the book of Revelation. You'll begin to see why I enjoyed so much speaking to the students in Aberdeen. Revelation chapter 7 and verse 15. Remember, God dwelling with his people. Therefore are they before the throne of God, and serve him day and night within his temple. He who sits upon the throne, oh, I love this phrase, will shelter them with his presence. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd. That's a wonderful mixture, isn't it? The Lamb will be the shepherd. I've no objection. And he will guide them to springs of living water, and God himself will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Turn over to Revelation chapter 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city. Don't like the bit the sea was no more. Every time in Aberdeen I make a point of going down to the seafront just to look at it. I think the sea here means, to the Jews, the sea was separation. They didn't understand the sea, and they were scared at the sea. Oh, said, none of that anymore. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with men. He will dwell with them. And he'll be happy. He'll be comfortable. And so will we. And they shall be his people, and God himself will be with them, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more, neither shall be any mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. Revelation chapter 22. Then he showed me the river of water. Now I'm sure when John the Apostle and Patmos was seeing all this, John said, I see more now what the prophet Joel meant in that last chapter. He showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, through the middle of the street of the city. Also on either side of the river, the tree of life, with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. I said to the student, how can you eat all that? And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. There shall no more be anything accursed, nothing that shadows or blights our experience, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall worship him. I think the old version says, his servants shall serve him. And we'll be able to do it properly. Oh, how often people go home, don't know about other people, Sunday school teachers, I'm sure, Bible class leaders, missionaries and ministers, how often you go home and say, oh, I wish I'd done it better. Oh, that God was saying, oh, it deserved a far better sermon than that. Oh, I wish I'd done it better. But here the time comes, his servants shall worship him, they shall serve him, and they shall see his face. And his name shall be on their foreheads. And night shall be no more. They need no light of lamp or sun. For the Lord God will be their light, and they shall reign forever and ever. I can still remember one of the last sermons that I heard Dr. William Fitch preaching on a Sunday evening in Springburn. The sun was shining in through the church windows. Don't remember much of the rest of the sermon. I remember exactly where I was sitting across on the side and what was the man's pew. And the end of the sermon was this simple statement, but it stayed with me. It's getting on now for half a century. Not quite. He said, and the end of the road is to see the face of Jesus. I still don't understand that chapter of Joel, but we'll leave it there.